You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. This could be the shortest sermon ever preached. I could sit down right now. We'd all heard the gospel. It should be short because at the end of the scripture, Jesus even says, well, that's pretty much it. Go and do likewise. It might be short, except that the story features a lawyer asking the questions. And that doesn't cause much hope for brevity. It could be the shortest sermon ever, as you know by now, by virtue of the fact that you called the preacher to tell it to you. It probably won't be. We come together on Sunday morning to bring light to something that is deep within us, to find clarification, a direction, a way of being that aligns us to something that we cannot see yet know in our hearts to be so true, beating with the cosmic pulse of the universe, and we want to be a part of that pulse. We want to know how to act in this world, how to love and how to be loved, how to walk the path that leads us in the right direction. And when something happens along the path, as we see in our gospel story today and in our news this week, we want to be assured that our actions are in accord with what our heart tells us to be true. See, there's something more to the story that meets the eye, something so obvious that it needs to be examined. Because on the surface, we hear the story as a story. There is a road that goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho. It's a dangerous road, about 17 miles long. It drops about 3,000 feet in those miles. It's a favorite hangout for thieves and robbers. And Jesus intentionally does not describe the man who was attacked by those thieves and robbers. The audience was Jewish and would naturally assume that he was a Jew. But being in this half-dead state, he would be unconscious. And since he is left naked, he is unidentifiable. And historically, a person can be identified in one of two ways, in his dress and in his speech. But the man is now any person. He cannot be identified. He's void of ethnic background, void of stature, void of position. And since the priest who passes him by is bound by the stricture of religious law, he could risk defilement if he touched someone who is not of his religion. His religious system sets him apart from others. The road is a long one. It's very likely that a person walking on it could see a long, long way ahead, and the Levite may have seen the priest ahead of him and could have thought to himself, if the priest may pass by, then so may I. And finally, the Samaritan walks along. The Samaritans were a mixed race between the Jews of captivities and the people around Israel. And since they were not purely of one race, they were set apart from their kin in Jerusalem. And when we set each other apart, usually some hostility arises. The Samaritan is not a Gentile. He's bound by the same law as the Jews. The Samaritan would not naturally be from that area, so the half-dead man would certainly not qualify as his neighbor. But it's the Samaritan who risks the defilement. He approaches this unidentifiable man and helps him. He doesn't recognize the wall that places some within and others outside of the rules of acceptability. He takes seriously the words of the law that compel us to love God and love our neighbors as ourselves. He went beyond it, not only rescuing the man, but putting him up and paying what would have been 2 days' wages for his food and lodging as he went along on his way. The story is so simple. I mean, Jesus even says so much. Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the thieves and the robbers? And the lawyer said, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. Where are you on your walk this morning? How do you discern what is the right thing to do when those representing the values we are taught walk on by, or worse, become the perpetrators of the violence to the man the Samaritan found? Whether he was the man beaten and robbed that Jesus spoke of, or someone who more likely might resemble Michael Brown or Tamir Rice. How do we walk that walk today, and for whom do we stop along the way. The Lord in the parable hears Jesus ask, "Who is my neighbor?" And Jesus describes the man who was beaten by robbers and left on the road. The neighbor does not have a name or a nationality or a religious or a social identity. The neighbor is simply our neighbor. And God's justice is for all. So how do we walk down that long descending road to Jericho today when we face every day the constant news of another mass shooting? This week, it was Alton Sterling and Philandro Castile killed by policemen, and then it was 5 police officers in Dallas. Can we ever actually allow this to permanently become the new normal for our nation? When Jesus was telling the story, he had already summed it up with the words, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." UCC Justice and Witness Minister Reverend Tracy Blackman says that the guns that were used in all of these killings were, quote, "loaded by our common enemies, fear and hate." The same ammunition is responsible for the bombing of mosques and the burning of churches. The same ammunition fuels the escalating levels of death in our nation's streets as a result of communal violence. Irrational fear and hatred that nurses at the breast of a nation increasingly divided against itself. Blackman writes, "We will pause to lament collectively the lives lost in Dallas and the blood that stains our streets from death at the hands of fear and hate. We must mourn them all because we are all connected. And we must find our way back to love." Murder is a byproduct of people who have lost their love. Love is our only hope. May calm and rational people prevail. Attorney General Loretta Lynch said, "Now, after the events of this week, Americans across the country are feeling a sense of helplessness, of uncertainty, and of fear. And these feelings are understandable and they are justified. But the answer must not be and must never be violence. The answer is never violence. Rather, the answer, our answer, all our answers must be action. Calm, peaceful, collaborative, and determined action. We must continue to build trust between communities and law enforcement. We must continue working to guarantee every person in this country has equal justice under the law. And we must take a hard look at the ease with which wrongdoers can get their hands on deadly weapons and the frequency with which they use them. And we must reflect on the kind of country that we want to build and the kind of society we are choosing to pass on to our children. After all, she said, we must reject the easy impulses of bitterness and rancor and embrace the difficult work, but the important work, the vital work of finding a path forward together. And above everything, we must remind ourselves that we're all Americans. And as Americans, we share not just a common land, but a common life. Not common goals, but a common heart and a common soul. Robin West, writing in St. John's Law Review, says, justice by definition must be caring, and conversely, that caring by definition must be just. So look at our passage today from Amos. The prophet Amos describes a scene where God is standing next to a wall holding a plumb line. And the plumb bob hangs straight down and to the exact center of the earth. And the line between the hand and the bob is therefore upright. It's an image of justice. The nation, but it can be any nation or society or religion or ideology, will be inspected It will be measured for its uprightness, its integrity. Just as a wall that is out of plumb will collapse, so a society or ideology that is unjust cannot stand. Do our dealings today pass the plumb line test? Are they on the up and up? Are they on the level? Are they fair and square? As harsh as the passage sounds, what makes this image compelling in its imperative dimension is this: I am going to measure my people Israel by a plumb line. No longer will I overlook their offenses. Somewhere a prophet's voice is saying that a nation, a people, will be measured by its uprightness and by its integrity. We will be inspected, measured, held to account by our breaches or our failure to stop on the side of the road when we see injustice or pain, where we can close ourselves off from the dialogue and throw barriers up. We are judged when we walk on past the growing disparities between first and third world, past class, past the isms of social inequities that keep us apart, racism. These injustices must be righted. Justice demands it. And if we are to be moral, we can do no less. I read a story that shows the hope and the comfort, even if it hasn't yet come. The grandmother of Luis Omar Ocasio-Capo, one of those who was killed at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, was flown on a JetBlue flight from her home down to Orlando for the funeral. And a flight attendant there thought it would be nice to get signatures of willing passengers on a piece of paper, just expressing their condolences. And so she started circulating a page, just a piece of paper at the back of the plane. And attendants whispered to the passengers what was going on, and soon another piece of paper was needed, and then another, and then another, and then another, until a sheaf of paper was handed to this grandmother. And when the flight was over, fellow passengers, she discovered, had written paragraphs of comfort, love, and hope. Now, will she gather comfort from them today? Maybe a bit. But she has these kind words to digest, to put away, to take out again, to read in bits and pieces, to read in one sitting, whatever, to keep as a tangible expression of love. Comfort. We must allow ourselves and others to feel whatever we need to feel when we need to feel it. Eventually, comfort may come when we lean on each other and gently care for each other. Loretta Lynch concluded her remarks the other day by saying, "To all Americans, I ask you, I implore you, do not let this week precipitate a new normal in this country. I ask you to turn to each other, not against each other. As we move forward, let us support one another. Let us help heal one another. I urge you," she said, "to remember today and every day that we are one nation. We are one people. And as such, we must always stand together." And so the question I ask this morning again is, where are you on your walk this morning? How do you discern what is the right thing to do when those representing the values we are taught and taught to trust walk on by? The Good Samaritan was the only one to walk the walk of real, simple, and honest faith. Faith with justice, the only kind of faith. The Samaritan simply loved God and loved his neighbor as himself. How are you this morning digesting this news? Wanting to love your neighbor, what will be the outcome? Or how are you loving your neighbor this morning, your spouse, your partner, your friend, your enemy, your co-worker, or even the citizen of the world whom you have never met, but yet breathes the same air you breathe and drinks the same water of life and is affected on some level by your actions, our actions in this world. Jesus asked the lawyer, which of these was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the lawyer answered, the one who showed mercy. It was the one who showed mercy. And Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. May all of us go and do likewise. Amen. Let's rise and sing our closing hallelujah.